why I have this honor? Well, I have some track record or my experience that definitely is useful to discuss external energy policy from the EU Commission's perspective, because I have been Commissioner for Energy 2004-2010, so two gas crises exactly happening at that time, plus the next commissioners really followed the policy principles that have been suggested at that time. And I have also some experience with developing countries, particularly African continent, but not only, during my second mandate as development commissioner. So you could go beyond and also be specific in your questions. My presentation is built around well, couple of issues that are legal, energy union, energy sector transformation in general, EU import dependency, new challenges, and also consensus building. I will not talk a lot about hydrogen because you have a lot of sessions towards this particular issue, but it is an issue that I also work in the Florence School of Regulation. But if you are going to the hardcore external energy policy, it's basically three questions that we always ask. Is Russia a reliable supplier? Well, today perhaps it will be less obvious to ask than during the 2004-2010 period, because you can also ask, is AstraZeneca a reliable supplier? So it's a lot of reliable suppliers, and I think this mentality of seeing something that is cut in stone is moving away. But still, it is an energy very particular issue. Can you trust? Because in that period, it was based on the experience that during the Soviet Union, the deliveries have been flowing. So why should be worried? And I think that was one of the obstacles really in building EU common market, security of supply, but it has evolved. Second is less pronounced, but I still remember standing in front of OPEC doors in Vienna, waiting that they allow me to come in. And it was that period when the oil prices have been 3 digits. Today, everybody is, well, started to forget it, but oil prices moved immensely from nearly, well, 20 or even lower than $20 per barrel to 160 something dollars per barrel. And when OPEC is now together with Russia and some other producers, you could always wonder what will be the reaction of the market. So far, well, nothing spectacular, but it is another issue that you still would expect from external energy policy to answer. Will oil prices stay reasonable, and would there be some big fluctuations? And the third question comes, well, quite recent, because definitely US and China is not in the same boat. If we can see globally, but no, also I think it's going strongly also now, more strong pronounced even in climate change policies. So you basically would ask, with whom you are more friend? With US, so you're flying Air Force One, or with China? Well, they usually don't invite to sit on the plane, but you are going on other. Saying said this, it's too narrow. And I think Professor Knott, she explained already broadness. Energy policy is not these three, well, most obvious questions. That's why I would like to start where we are legally, because legally the framework is moving. It's not exactly what I have inherited in 2004. Well, the main principles has been end of design. From one side, it's solidarity. So if you are working together, you are more stronger, so you can help each other. Well, you need also some framework for it. But at this article, it was always perception that solidarity is something political, not legal, but spirit is there. On the other side is subsidiarity. Well, that was considered by far more stronger. The union should do something that member states can't do themselves. And that is depending on viewpoint. You could assume that from the federalist point of view, member states can't do too much. from the point of view of member states, I can do everything. So, and that I think is where the subsidiarity is rather broad concept. But with legal treaty development, I think things have become clearer. First of all, it is shared competence. And I think it's fair because delivery of energy to the industry, to the households, dealing with energy poverty, energy supplies. So it's very clear, very difficult to imagine that it comes from Brussels or from central point. At the same time, solidarity, security of supply, and others, you can't really deal with the union. And if you see the Article 2.2 from the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, it already gives a slight preference to union action, because if union has legislated, then member countries could act only under this. So regulations and directives in energy sector is getting more and more focused and more stronger compared what was 10 or 15 years ago. And what is also very easy now compared with the times earlier is that there is article on energy, and all proposals and all actions are based on this article 194, where very clear gives what are the competencies of the union. And if you see, it's energy market, security of supply, energy efficiency, research and development, interconnections, basically everything. You would argue that where there is the role of member countries, it depends on soft negotiation skills when you negotiate some articles. And at the same time, it's also give preservation of member state rights on the internal energy mix. But this is slightly, I would say, is perception. I could mention only two very clear issues where member countries definitely preserve their independence or sovereignty fully. It is nuclear energy, to develop or not. Their union has not the slightest impact on this issue. And the second, it's how you use your energy resources internally, because to give license for development will never come from outside. So even if this most perfect wind park could be built there, no one could give license to it. It's only member country itself could decide that there will be possibility to build a wind park or big solar. So that means that there is some limit where you place producing, but energy mix is affected with the common market and with the trade. You would say, well, where does it lead external energy policy? And it leads in particular more coherence. On the right, you see, well, from my side, from the right, is a famous pipeline. Which one? I think you guessed. It's South Stream. Perhaps you already forgot it, but it's not that it was forgotten. And South Stream, in essence, demonstrated all the problem external policy had before this South Stream case. Because Brussels could negotiate external energy and member states could do the same. But the preconditions for both actually are the same. It's EU internal market rules. And if member country negotiates something differently, it leads to disaster because you can promise something that you can't deliver. And South Stream was exactly this case. So to avoid the catastrophe, like was with South Stream, for better or worse, that's something different to be discussed. There is this called information exchange mechanism. Actually, it's quite strong because you need to inform for oil and gas agreements ex ante assessment for the Commission. It does not go so far that Commission participates in negotiations, but you could assume that in reality it is. So whatever member country will decide, because it's its sovereign right to negotiate on energy, it still very much will be reflected on the Commission side. So that means that the framework, what individual member country could start, still will comply with general rules. So this information exchange mechanism is by far stronger that it could anybody imagine at that time. But it was not driven from top down, from Brussels. It came up because it was face losing. If you negotiate something that you can't deliver, it's face losing. And it's better that the union keeps some coherence. So it is fundamental change in subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is getting, in my opinion, by far more narrow also in external energy policy. Another principle that change a lot, still we need to have a final judgment, is solidarity. I mentioned that solidarity has been always seen slightly like a political term. But European Court of Justice, making ruling on the OPAL pipeline, decided well that it also has legal meaning. And this particular case, OPAL pipeline, for the ones that has not followed the case, is the one that basically brings gas from Nord Stream 1 to, well, south, basically, close to Polish border. And Polish case was that, well, in this case, particular case, because for OPAL pipelines, there was exemption given by the Commission from third-party access. So you use more capacity than you normally would be allowed to use. That if you do this, then Poland has a problem, because the pipeline from which it gets fed that passes via Poland will be less used. In theory, you could replace the supply, but it's not guaranteed. At least you need it to reflect on it before you have made this exemption ruling. Now, Germany has appealed the case, Commission has not appealed, and also Gazprom has not appealed, and it will come now in judgment. But whatever judgment will be, it definitely changed the sense of solidarity. Perhaps it's not a huge revolution, but it's quite substantial impact that solidarity in external energy policy will be playing more role than ever before. So that's why I'm saying even without treaty changes, there is more direction of coherence of the EU external policy, at least for security of supply and solidity. Then let's move to another dimension, and it is energy union. Actually, energy union is a very interesting concept because originally it was suggested by, I think, President Sarkozy, and then it was by Donald Tusk, basically to make a buyer's cartel. So you have a member countries politicize gas buying, and to get a better leverage to go with Russia or whoever, but basically with Russia, to go to buy gas as a block. It's against EU market principles, and that's why I think so far it never went, and there was other tools how to deal with this. But this concept has been rethought and said, well, if we think in this respect, EU as an energy bloc could have a more structured format. It's not 3 dimensions of energy policy. It could be, well, more structured development and around 5 pillars: security of supply, internal market, energy efficiency, climate action, and research, innovation, and competitiveness. So when we think now external energy policy, basically we need to go through the dimensions. So that is influenced also the thinking about external energy policy. And the benchmark is State of the Energy Union reports. Well, the latest one from 2020 basically said during the COVID issues, we have preserved rather good supply. Market played a good role, but if we see from some aspects negative, research and innovation suffered and energy efficiency suffered. But for security of supply, interesting that this growing import dependency, and you see all the lines are going in the direction that there is more challenge of supply. Actually, import dependency increasing, security of supply is improving. And that's rather interesting. I will go more in depth on the gas, but it's everything. If you have more diversified supplies, if you have better interconnection, if you have better emergency preparedness, and most importantly, improving energy market, you basically respond well for even in at least an energy sector in a situation where your import dependency is growing. Actually, it gives you some leverages, very important leverages compared with others. So that, I think, is one of the biggest assets of the European Union. And that's why it was Vice President Shevchovich have had this honor to fly an Air Force One. So it's not that Union is weak with this. Actually, Union got a strength with this. But it's true that the aspects of energy policy, external interests have changed. So it is even now decision not on energy diplomacy, it's not climate and energy diplomacy. And if you read the latest council conclusion on energy policy, then you will find 95%, it's acceleration of global energy transition, and 5% actually about core business, liquid and transparent global markets, because it's if you are importing, then you have a problem if you have more imports. So you can't, you need to rely on global liquid markets. Otherwise, you are in trouble with a big import dependency. And for the EU specifically, even with the best intentions saying, because if somebody would say that Russia is a reliable supplier, still better diversify suppliers and sources. You need to do this, and it's not granted per se. It's hard work to achieve it. So that means that the classical activities of external energy policy are reflected, but most of the attention is definitely for accelerating global energy transition. Still, there could be a very, very challenging shift. And Daniel Yergin has written a new book, The New Map, Energy, Climate Change, and the Class of Nations. If you have not read anything from Daniel Yergin, I would always advise you to start reading the book called The Prize. It's about oil history. And it's brilliantly written. You will read it, it's like a crime story, or it's really a really good book. So it's and the new one, you could find it challenging because you come back to the same challenges. Is Russia a reliable supplier? How the world is changing, OPEC and OPEC plus, and US, China definitely designs. And from Daniel's point of view, he goes very much from energy imperative, because if you see the price, and especially his hypothesis why Japanese joined the Second World War, it's because of access to the oil. So energy is not getting less interesting geopolitically. Actually, it's disguised this importance with many different things, but still in essence, there is a challenge being built in this transition. And you can't just realize that everything will sort it out, because it's not only final commodities that is important. It's also supply chains, supply routes. It's many things. And if you would like to change, well, what happens with supply infrastructure? So there is by far more than the final commodity. And sometimes people who are well-thinking and well-meaning, advocating that there will be easy transition, it's not so. It's by far more complicated technically, but also geopolitically. That's why let's see what is the main challenges if we go in this transition. Basically, no one can argue that this challenge, this transition, you can reverse. I think none of them. Everybody look from two different perspectives. One part of people look, the change will go faster, and the other, perhaps it will take very, very long period. I would say this would be two different approaches to it. Because climate change, pollution, and public opinion is very, very strong, and this is getting as a more imperative. Then another imperative is that renewable energy sector and some technologies, particularly PV and wind, is always declining costs. And even during the COVID period, the only area where investments can increase, it was in the renewable energy sector. And it's not because just political pressure, but it was because there was also business sense. So it's not only this. And last but not least, it's also policy instruments are going, renewable energy targets, corporate investments, and also this sustainable investment strategy. In EU, it tries now to be underpinned by taxonomy principles. But there is a fundamental, and there could no person, I think, in his own sense, saying that there is not energy transformation going. The point is to what scale and how fast, and that is different issue. If we see clean energy investments, that is a main, perhaps, measurement of the change. It's increasing, but not to the scale you would expect. I hope that in 20s we will have some steeper line, but it's not to the scale that you would say this transition is happening very fast. And you will talk about hydrogen. Today we have, I think, 30 megawatt or electrolyzer capacity, and we need 1 gigawatt by commission plan only by 2025. From megawatts to gigawatts in such a short time span, you need money, you need investment. And this is still not, we are still not there, even if mentally we agree that that is a change. But from energy policy principles, there is now a real competition coming because there are opportunities for new energy leaders. And that is not only fossil fuel resource having countries, but countries that have or minerals or being leaders in technological innovation, or with how renewable energy technical potential. I would mean skilled people, production facilities, etc. So there is a shift. It could be the same countries. It does not mean necessarily that fossil fuel countries, resource-rich countries should move out, but well, the tendency is not good for them and it's their own fault. But it's also true that this transition is in a way easier because it's more democratic. It's less top-down, but it's also bottom-up. Citizens, local municipalities, corporations play by far more important roles than in previous transition. So this transition is definitely huge, but the impact can be less dramatic as it be top down. For me, I think the mega challenge is for countries with fossil resources to change the strategies. And here you clearly see what happens. It's a measurement or metrics of patents for renewable energy. Countries with a lot of fossil fuel resources are not enough diversifying their economies, investing in new technologies. Look on Russia, on Saudi Arabia, it's not working. And if you speak with Russian experts, so it's very much oil and gas economy. It's still not shifting fast enough in the direction. There are some attempts. I'm not saying that nothing has happened. Also in Saudi Arabia, there are plans, but it's not strong enough drive. And if it's not strong enough drive, there is a challenge of clash where you have new world emerging and old still there. And if there could be clash in a sense that you have high oil prices, or social problems in some of exporting countries, or something else. So this transition or the soft transition is not guaranteed, at least not at this stage. For some countries, it's definitely an enormous challenge. It's low resilience, high exposure countries. But it's not only them that I have in mind. I have really countries like, well, they are superpowers like Russia. They definitely need to make this transition. And they have created this nano complex with former Minister Chubais that have been there. They did investments in renewable energy or energy efficiency, but not to the scale that you could say Russian economy today is different as it was 20 years ago. So that means that there is a time still, but there are some risks. For some economies more, for some less, but definitely it is. At the same time, for others, it's our opportunities. So if we look from this point of view, that it's basically healthy development. It's healthy development in the sense that energy resources, so having oil reserves or gas reserves, is less likely to play as a geopolitical instrument. They could be used with carbon capture and storage, with some new technologies. It still could be wealth of income, but it not leads to the same situation like was in 73 when OPEC countries used the blockade of Western countries and basically, well, influenced badly their economies and welfare for some time. There are uh, also for importers better, because if you have more diversity in supplies, you are more safe. So that means that less nervousness on it, and that means better developments for global markets. Saying said this, there are a couple of challenges, and particularly these rare minerals, because they come from out some places. There have been some studies looking on it. It's not such a geopolitical dependency as it used to be with energy resources, but it is challenging, it's true. And well, it's need to be taken into account in developing renewable energy potentials, because there could be bottlenecks, and the bottlenecks could be for very different reasons, and it's not, well, absolutely simple sailing. But generally the transition gives opportunities more than it creates problems. So seeing this, so if we manage successful transition from one situation to another, well, I think the world will be not only cleaner, but by far more safer and by far more prosperous. Now, coming back to reality. Well, reality is, let's look on the EU energy mix in 2018. That's the latest data. And here you see, well, something that is less you would expect from media. Oil is still the biggest part of energy mix, 34%, gas 22%, and coal is 14%. So nuclear is there, but it's decreasing. Renewables are growing, but still altogether this two is 28%. So you have real issues here. So even with current situation, we need to look how to guarantee the security of supply. And EU import dependency is close to 60% overall. But for gas, it's growing very rapidly. And that, I think, is one of the terms of preoccupation, because gas is an issue not only being looked from security of supply and feedstock, but also as some type of transitional or also post-transitional fuel. So I think gas issue is there, and there is another aspect, because whoever has in mind replacement of current energy system with the next, imagines two things. One, well, that it's immense electrification, and you need to think that, well, it's difficult to imagine that you could replace everything by electricity, because you have supply chain constraints as well. But there is another presumption that is wrong, that hydrogen could replace natural gas. And it's different type of energy carrier. It's not the same, and it has a different characteristics, not only physical, but it's not replacing exactly oil and gas as a new fuels there. So there is a new qualities that need to be developed, and we don't know exactly how it will evolve. We could assume, for example, for space heating by today's studies, that there is electricity only needed, but provided that you can deliver renewable electricity on such a scales. If you can't, you need to decarbonize fuel. And then hydrogen perhaps here has a chance. The same with electrical vehicles. We have not still had electrical vehicles by scale, enormous scale. So there could be supply constraints. Again, hydrogen vehicles, even for private households, could play a role. So it is this transition in demand side is highly uncertain. There could be some assumption and modeling, but it's not there. And that's why the import dependency is important. And here clearly you see why the question about Russia comes here and there. Russia Federation is by far the biggest supplier of gas. It's true that they lost this powerful tool. At some stage, today's Russian president said, well, guys, if you see about your gas supply, you have only three sources: Russia, Qatar, that basically is focused on Asia, and Iran. And good luck with Iran. Since then, things have changed considerably because gas is very liquid market also globally coming. So even if you have Russia with 40%, it's not necessarily a threat for your security of supply. Because for oil, well, Russia is also the biggest supplier, 30%. And we never had a problem with security of supply on oil because oil is a rather developed global market. Still, OPEC Plus is a bit of headache also for us because if there is monopoly situation, well, you could argue that you could have a problem. But in this respect, US have with shale revolution changed a lot, and US is the biggest supplier of the market. So you would say that, well, oil and gas import dependency changed substantially with developments in the global market. But for the EU, that instruments to achieve security of supply and support you in external discussions is diversification. It's a very contested and difficult thing, but it's diversification not only of the routes and sourcing countries, but also, well, your energy sources. More renewable energy sources definitely help security of supply. Then you make interconnections and bidirectional flows, and that provides quite a lot of impact. Liquid and transparent market is a perfect thing if you are well interconnected because the gas go where it is, well, highly priced. Emergency preparedness, you always need to remember that there could be something in the supply chain. There could be extraordinary weather events like in Texas. So you need to have this preparedness. You need to have this emergency preparedness with solidarity mechanisms in place. And then there is energy diplomacy. You work for global transparent markets. Plus, you are also trying to diversify at the same time because it is still the key for your security of supply. So energy diplomacy plays a role. And one of the issues that demonstrates this is this Southern Gas Corridor. So I started the process, so it was 2005. Now, after more than 15 years, we are nearly there. But it took quite a lot of time. It's true that it's a lot of investments, but it's basically for big projects. Shakhtani gas field that likes to supply EU market. South Caucasus pipeline, it's one regulatory regime. TANAP, Trans-Anatolian pipeline through Turkey, came as the best solution at the end of the day. And then Trans-Adriatic pipeline supplying market where there is more demand. So it takes a time to diversify. Now there is a lot of discussion also about East Med that could also help this diversify supplies. But East Med, we also need to take into account it serves only some time. But diversification is definitely important instrument. To demonstrate that external energy policy is not just outside pipeline, it is interconnection. And Baltic region is the best example of the changes you need to be to be efficient in also external energy relations. Klaipėda LNG terminal that was built in as a consequence of third energy package definitely changed the situation. And today with supported investments from the EU instruments, Baltic Connector connecting Finland and Baltic, Poland and Lithuania, and also reverse flow for Estonia, Latvia makes situations completely different. Even most of the gas that is in this market, so it is Russian gas, but you have internal diversity, you have storages where commercial operators store their gas, and it immediately facilitates your external energy relations, because supplier that would not like to supply lose money, and that is sometimes politically perhaps tolerable on the other side, but not for a long time. So I think that is something that is also important. Then is particularity of the EU, it's the biggest regional market. So everybody today would like to supply it because it has a hub pricing and external supplies, and LNG developments today is that there is not destination clause. So it changed situation with long-term supply, and that is a remarkable development, because when I was still in office, and it's 15 years ago, there was perception security of supply in gas is related to security of demand. So you need to have long-term agreement that somebody invests in in gas field, and then you supply. Today, it's not anymore the case. And it's good for planet because that gives more chance for renewables, but it's also good for security of supply. You work for the markets. And with due respect to Russians' inflexibility, well, they also are now an LNG market. It's not Gazprom so much, but they are Novatek. So, and there is not anymore monopoly on gas exports in this. So it's quite interesting development, how global developments definitely alleviates these worries about energy supply. Still, I'm coming back to solidarity, and there was a huge event, in my opinion, sometimes not so seen from European, is that Germany and Denmark agreed on solidarity deliveries in Europe. It's part of the security of gas regulation. It took a time, but now we now have at least that, well, in the case of need, you have the same approach to the supply in emergency, because the real challenge is not unwillingness to supply resources to another EU country. The challenge is what I will cut at home to supply or to allow supplies to neighbor. And we have seen this challenge with COVID as well. So how you deal with this issue. And definitely if you have agreed on bilateral solidarity, then you have the same definitions. Which households should be left to the latest moment for security of supply? Which industries should be? How you take away demand if you have a really supply problem? And it's not only theory, it's not only unwillingness, it also involves a lot of deep details. And that it took so long to negotiate such a type of agreement. But I would praise it, it's unbelievable success, because that definitely demonstrates that the EU is not weak as sometimes is being presented, that the EU is incapable. No, EU is moving more than anybody has achieved in this area. And if you see Texas crisis, well, in the EU, I would say this would be impossible. Even, well, I wish that we would not have very long spells. We have also electricity system cut in half, but still we are by far better equipped because we have experiences of this deploy. Saying said this, with the old problems in new quality, we have new challenges coming. And it's particularly this electricity and energy use. Yes, we are less interconnected because here you need supply and demand balance, and we have back-to-back supply with some electricity, but mostly it is your own producer market. Well, with the exception of Norway, but it is part of EU market anyhow. So you could clearly see that there is new geopolitical pattern. Today, Chinese perhaps are less pronounced on this, but there are these ideas of global network. And to be honest, at some stage, Russia wanted very much one electricity system with Europe. The problem was that, well, you need to build a lot of capacity to guarantee that there is not splitting of the system in some challenging moments. And as you know, things have evolved not in positive sense in that direction. Baltic countries now are getting synchronized with EU central market, and it's clearly not because only of electricity supply challenges, but it's also in general developments in Russia where they say, well, we can live without European Union, we don't trust it and whatsoever. Okay, it is verbal, it's not necessarily reflects all policy, but still it is a signal that you clearly have, and that means that this electricity interrelation between different countries, especially if their political relations are constrained, it's something new. It's something new that we have not seen so far. Then I mentioned geopolitics of renewable energy. It is definitely supply routes. It is also rare materials. So it is, and last but not least, it is cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. These are new issues. These are uncharted territories in a way for energy diplomacy. It's something new, and it is request also a lot of also technical knowledge, especially for electricity and for cybersecurity. But I assume this will evolve for all of them. Speaking about this particularity on energy, there is a good example how you can sort of it. It's the so-called energy community. It's treaty that I was part of negotiating, and it's in force since 2006. And the logic was that you don't have too much differences if you have the same legal framework in energy as in this market. So you approach things in the same way, and you respond to the same environmental challenges in the same way, and you can work in this way. And energy community with all the difficulties, definitely success. And let's just see the unbundling of gas transmission operator in Ukraine. It's just one of the big success stories, but a lot of others are quite important developments. And if I see the next countries that perhaps would need to negotiate it, I would say Tunisia, Morocco, because both sides have an interest, but I don't see how you can advance in electricity relations without models similar to energy community. It's not oil and gas. It's by far more challenging. Then there is a new challenges, and I work on this. It is methane emissions. It's oil, gas, coal, and also biomethane. So methane emissions is definitely a priority. And there is external dimension. And there are two challenges. One challenge is rather simple: more transparency, more regulation on the methane emissions reduction. Good. This is easily achievable. Well, easily not, but there is more understanding. But then there is the other. How you make a real impact? Is it only through diplomacy, or you need also the strength of consumer? And EU market is the most important. And you could imagine that EU asks that we allow to supply by some gas that has these environmental characteristics, including methane emissions intensity. And if you are over it as a shipper, you buy such a gas, then you pay a fine. And you could go even more further. So you can use your market power as a leverage to improve investments and methane detection and limitation and mitigation methane emissions in supply chain. But this is quite a new territory. And in ideal case, you agree with your suppliers because you should have the same. You should not necessarily start with market instrument to push somebody in one direction, but you can convince, let's agree on this, let's make bilateral agreement. And here I see immense space for diplomacy, because in ideal case, it would be agreement with Russia for us, Algeria, Norway, we have no problem because Norway supplying is very low intense, and US. and then others will be on board. So there are some trends, but this is, I think, immense area. There is an International Methane Emissions Observatory that will be working under UNEP. And here on the right, you see some satellite, new technologies that helps. And these are methane emissions from some Russian pipelines. I'm not saying that this is something that is the biggest emissions, no. But today's technology allows really to see where methane emissions are coming from. And the best way is definitely that you repair the leaks. You help that to repair the leaks. And from other side, each country would say it's our own sovereignty. We do as we like. And I again would say that energy diplomacy could help to bridge this difficulty. You will speak a lot about the hydrogen economy, and there are three difficult issues. One is definitely, Arina will talk, that the decrease of the cost of clean hydrogen. So it's too expensive compared even with today's feedstock, so-called gray hydrogen. So price difference is 2 factor. So Arina is quite optimistic that lower prices could be achieved. Then you need to increase the production capacities, because today all the hydrogen nearly that is being produced, it is based on from the fossil fuels with all the emissions. And last but not least, you need to establish global market. And this will be far from simple, but you will hear more about these issues. But the main task, I assume, and it's overarching task, is for external energy relations, is working together to accelerate the clean energy revolution. And there are many instruments, mission innovation, and you see that this has worked reasonably well, but not to the scale I would have expected. Clean Energy Ministerial, International Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency, United Nations, G20 and G7. And there is dynamics that is positive, that everybody gets engaged, but it's far from certain. And there, my opinion, diplomatic activities need to be strengthened with some market development mechanisms. The easiest would be definitely that everybody accepts the same carbon price or the same carbon pricing mechanism, but it's difficult to expect. So that would mean the world could be more patchy, but the ones that need to take responsibility. And for EU, this big challenge is now with this border carbon adjustment mechanism. Is something that is definitely we would not desire, but you can't make a deep carbonization if you don't have this in your internal economy, because then you lose your economy. Basically, you export your emissions. And this is not, something that should be acceptable. The challenge is to make this in a way that everybody understands why you are doing, how you are doing it, and that also it is getting support inside your own country. So external energy diplomacy, in conclusion, I would say, has gone through transition. And in my opinion, EU is definitely getting more coherent, and where subsidiarity sometimes is advancing things, not actually preventing things. Saying said this, we should be also careful for our security of supply and our exposure to the supplies, to classical supplies of fossil fuels. And we can't neglect that, there is no challenges. And there are challenges now, but there will be some challenges also transition phase. So thank you very much. And now let's go to the questions.
There's one question in the chat. Okay, should we risk taking cheap gas prices over a growing risk of import dependency? So where's this equilibrium for you or for Commission?
Well, I don't see it, because if you have flexible and liquid market, and we have in most of the parts of Europe, not in all parts, you basically, the cheap is very relative question, terminology, because what is cheap for one is expensive for another. So you have suppliers that try to supply the market to sell gas in the EU market, and they will try to adapt what demand is able to pay for. So I don't see there as a risk, because most of the sectors that consumes gas, not all, has a ETS mechanism, and the ETS in new phase puts a price on carbon. So basically, natural gas is already taxed in a way with a carbon price that it brings with it. So we should not be worried about it. I think the only risk is that if we keep very low carbon prices for a lot of time, then we have less chance moving to hydrogen, renewable or low carbon hydrogen, because you will always will as a supplier, you would always balance this investment. For example, big energy companies like Shell, BP, when they will start massively invest in renewable energy. Shell president told some time ago that, well, we will be the biggest electricity company in the future. Today, they don't invest too much. Why they don't invest too much? Because of the relatively low carbon price, and there is no market-based incentive enough. But for gas, it will be always or cheap or expensive as you would look. So as a consumer, I pay for heating my house. So for me, it's always expensive. I would always love it lower. The ones that supplies me would always claim that they are just squeezed, they have a challenge, they need to invest in pipes, etc. So it will be always balanced, but market is the best way how to respond it, and also the best way how to limit direct use of natural gas. Then there is questions that I would expected, Nord Stream 2 in particular. Well, that I think is something that you need to discuss all together. Because for me, there are two aspects that are rather sad concerning Nord Stream 2. One is if you move a transition, then you would assume that natural gas's demand will go down. And if you see all the modeling, it goes down. Then why the companies, and it's European companies, are investing in new supply routes? That's, you can't find the answer for this. And from security of supply, it does not give you much as well, because it's the same route, it's the same supplier, and you have now sorted out the relations between Ukraine, Russia, and EU. But what's the big added value of it? And I think that is what I am said. Otherwise, I am not seeing it as a huge geopolitical catastrophe would be built, but I just see it is completely inconsistent with our climate policy. Not the slightest consistency in it. Yes, EU EU supplies, own supplies are going down. Netherlands will invest. But there is liquid LNG market. Russians are also on LNG market. Where's the problem with this? There is no real value added. I really don't see value added in this, but that happened. And we have now stalemate, and we have rather challenging now relations with US on this, because it's whatever US says, it's up to us to decide what is our security of supply issue. So it's rather painful the experience that we have. I hope it's the last such a type of painful experience that we will have. Yeah.
I was wondering, Michelle has, in her opening speech, discussed building up European market for hydrogen. Is it too early, or can we discuss for a minute on what model would it be built? What would be transferable from the gas market as we know it, and where hydrogen is so fundamentally different that this wouldn't work? And how does the possibility of shared infrastructure step into that?
Well, you will have Noah tomorrow, I think. Noah is
Yeah.
the expert. But from my side, there is a real challenge, because you have very unclear supply side or demand side. Sorry, supply side and transport. You can sort it out. It's not the biggest issue. I think for me, it is the biggest issue. Who will use this renewable or low carbon. That's where the challenge is. And that's why I think its latest Agora study actually brought, and also our study showed that you need to start where the gray hydrogen is. It's 10 million tons. Well, it's not huge, but it's serious demand. And you need to find an instrument that the ones that now use is gray hydrogen switch to renewable or low carbon. For, I think, refineries, low carbon with CCS seems more reasonable because they will be going on decline as an industry. But for steel, definitely we would have interest that they use as much as possible renewable because the technology is there. But as long as it is not there, this development, we have a bit of chicken and egg problem, but I think that the essence is on demand side, and particularly to look at there because we looked also for carbon prices. To push out gas in the conventional use, but you can't even think on this. You need basically carbon prices more than €100 per ton. If you look on the supplying as a feedstock, well, the prices are by far lower. In some cases, it could be €50 per ton. So that means close to what we have now. I understand that carbon price alone will not do the trick. You need to get something additional regulation or some additional incentives. But the answer for starting in carbon market, for my opinion, my colleagues' opinion, is exactly in the industrial sector. Plus, you can expect to work with companies in two other sectors. It is in aviation and maritime. Because whatever you thinking have for carbon-free demand in this sector, you can't bypass, at least at this stage, hydrogen. And now I'm thinking, just for example, we have a lot of packages for aviation companies, and we need to ask from them and return, encouraging switching to the clean fuels. And these clean fuels will be synthetic fuels in most cases based on hydrogen production. Well, it could start small. It shouldn't be necessarily big, but that's how it is. And the same for maritime sector. So I think there you can obviously say, and that's why I approach this no regret option, because you use a lot of subsidies, needs to be followed, in my opinion. And that would definitely take some time to evolve EU market. What concerns global market, it is more challenging. There is environmental dimension, because you need to be sure that who brings you hydrogen, it should be produced or with CCS or with renewable electricity. So you need certification and credible certification. Plus, you need also to look what are costs. And today costs with transport and production are quite high for producing somewhere else and bringing to EU. So if I see North Africa, for me, more sense would make that we have power purchase agreement with Morocco or with Tunisia or with Algeria and bring electricity and make hydrogen on the EU continent. But it's not based on the facts so far. But industry, for me, is the answer. That's where the demand need to be moved towards renewable or low carbon hydrogen.
We have one question, Jan, there. If you're going for hydrogen and maybe need the transportation there, how do you see the future of Nord Stream 2 is asked by Farid Karimi.
First of all, it's built like natural gas pipeline. It's not so simple. You need to repurpose. If you have pipeline in the sea, I don't know how easy you could change it for carrying hydrogen. You could add some hydrogen produced, for example, with pyrolysis on Russian side. But pyrolysis is not at this stage, and it's quite expensive in this. So at this stage, I can't evaluate Nord Stream 2 on hydrogen basis. There is no reason for this. There is no technology to scale that you could.
Yeah, do we need that anymore? Do we need Nord Stream 2 then?
Well, Don't ask me. So you should ask the companies that build them. So that put money in it. So I would say from political point, from environmental, it doesn't make sense. As I just repeat it. But if companies invested in it, and it is OMV, it is also Shell, etc., then they see the market for it. So for me, it's more difficult to answer it. I think politically, what I said, that it doesn't ring the bells, because for hydrogen, then you build from the start the hydrogen pipeline. But at this stage, definitely on Russian side, there is no technology to the scale of this. Then you can always argue that there will be technology and you could produce hydrogen in Greifswald. That you could argue, but it's enormous speculation. We will have, if somebody has more deeper interests on this, we will have this Wednesday at 9:30 discussion on pyrolysis, because that is the best technology favored by the industry. The idea is very simple. You split methane molecule in hydrogen and solid carbon. Okay, what you do with solid carbon, you could use it. Well, you can use a lot of this from the carbon. But the question is where technology is, how expensive it is. And then there is a third and fourth question. Third question is then, is it really zero emissions? That I think is third. And the fourth, what are the emissions in value chains? That's what I said about methane emissions. Because for us, when we would use this, would matter how much emissions happen in Yamal Peninsula and how much emissions are in the pipelines. We can't ignore it, because otherwise our own citizens would say, well, you are tricking us. You're not honest. So that means it's quite complex on this. But if somebody is interested, I am looking very much forward, because we have BASF, Wintershall, and then some institutions. So that I think is breaking news, what they should say one way or another. Could you really expect? Or you should say, well, the chances for such a type of technology to see in the light does not seem very realistic, because we have really people that know it, and at least industry, BASF and Wintershall, put a lot of weight behind it. So it will be interesting, at least for us. It's definitely a big thing.
Thank you. Jan, would you allow that last question, which is in the chat? I think we should just take it, because Franco Burgio is asking, because you mentioned the European energy community, and you mentioned in one half sentence that maybe Morocco should join. Should we extend the European energy community to the southern neighborhood?
I would definitely suggest that. It's up to them, the countries, to join it. It's not that we could impose, but I would speak with them, and it could be different, but on the same basis. But so it's not necessarily that they join exactly this energy community. It could be, well, South Mediterranean energy community or Mediterranean energy community. But I would argue for this, because if I see the potential of electrification in general, let's assume that these countries have this development. We have internal market rules in electricity going over Mediterranean. In Africa, they have ambition to create this African single electricity market. You could model or imagine at least that there will be a day, 50, 60 years, perhaps faster, where a European and African continent will have the same electricity grid, the same rules, and you would have a lot of renewable energy moving through the electricity grid, providing welfare for Africans, providing welfare and good climate for us. So I would say that I would do it, and I would definitely do it, because it's the best way forward in this regarding particular new technology. And there is another development. I recently followed some studies on Southern Mediterranean, and even with East Med, by 2050, Egypt could be net energy importer. So with all of the gas fields, there is a limit. So Israel could be net energy importer. Yes, there are 30-year span, but let's use it reasonably. So I would suggest whatever country is ready to do such a type of relationship, even bilaterally. Why not? Because we have model in our minds. Energy community is not easy model, but it fully respects the sovereignty. And that, I think, is crucial with negotiations with any country. So the model is good. It could be lighter, true, but that's the way. By the way, Turkey is observer. Well, we have other issues with Turkey, not about electricity market, but the original was not so much about Ukraine when we negotiated. It was Turkey that we have been thinking about. So I believe that is good model and should be tried in energy diplomacy, showing what are the challenges, what we have achieved, what we have not achieved. We shouldn't be shying away from where we have not achieved an energy community, what we have expected.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. We have closed the first 1 hour and the keynote. So thank you again for being us with here, and good luck with your future endeavors.
Okay, thank you. It was
Thank
honored to
you
be here.
very much. It was
Bye.
fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for these insights.